The mahogany dining table was set for 20, but the room felt like a battlefield when my husband, Julian, slammed his hand down, pointed at me, and snarled, "Apologize to my mother right now, or pack your bags and leave this estate this instant." His mistress, Selina, sat comfortably at his right hand, the seat that had been mine for 6 years, and let out a soft, mocking laugh that echoed against the vaulted ceiling. The entire family stared at me, their faces twisted in collective judgment, waiting for me to break. They expected me to beg for forgiveness for a slight I hadn't even committed. Is it better to sacrifice your dignity to keep a family together for the sake of your child? Or is walking away, burning the bridge behind you, the only way to save yourself from a lifetime of manipulation? Does a mother owe a toxic environment her presence, or does her true duty lie in finding a sanctuary where her son can breathe? What would you do if your partner forced you to choose between your self respect and your home? I looked at Julian, then at my 4-year-old son Leo, who was hiding his face against my leg. The realization hit me with cold clarity. This wasn't a family gathering, it was an execution of my spirit. "Fine," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll leave." I turned on my heel, pulled Leo into my arms, and walked out of that dining room without a single backward glance. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like stone, broken only by the sound of my heels clicking against the marble. Julian followed me to the entryway, his face reddening with a mix of fury and disbelief. "You think you're actually going anywhere? You have no money, no car, and no way to survive without my credit cards." I just opened my coat and pulled out 2 one-way tickets to a destination 3,000 miles away. I had been planning this exit since the day I found the first set of illicit texts on his iPad, the day I realized my marriage was nothing more than a front for his greed. "I don't need your cards, Julian." I caught a glimpse of Selina standing in the doorway behind him, looking smug. She thought I was bluffing. She thought I was just another woman who had nowhere else to go. She had no idea that I had spent the last 6 months preparing for this exact moment, laundering my own small income into a separate account and documenting his every offshore transaction. By the time they realized I wasn't going to the guest house, I was already behind the wheel of my own car, which I had secretly had serviced and packed 2 days prior. The engine purred to life, a low hum of freedom that sounded better than any music I'd ever heard. I took a deep breath, the smell of leather and pine filling my senses, and steered towards the main gate. I didn't head for the airport. I headed for the private hangar where a friend of my father's was waiting. As we pulled onto the tarmac, I saw a black sedan racing down the private driveway behind us. It was Julian's security team. I held Leo tighter. "Stay low," I whispered. We were seconds from vanishing into the sky. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands remained steady on the wheel. The pilot didn't even wait for a signal. He fired the engines as soon as he saw our car pull up to the wing. I ran across the tarmac, the wind whipping my hair, the roar of the jet engines drowning out the shouting from the security team behind us. The smell of jet fuel and ozone felt like the freshest air I had ever inhaled. Once we were in the air, I pulled out my phone and sent one single text to Julian's entire board of directors. It contained the files on the company's misuse of public funds, the same funds he had used to buy Selina her luxury lifestyle and keep her in the shadows while I raised his son. They went pale the second that data hit their inboxes, and I knew that by the time we landed, his world would be in ruins. I watched the clouds drift by, feeling the weight of the last 6 years finally evaporating. I wasn't the wife who apologized anymore. I was the woman who had finally taken the lead in her own life, and the consequences for Julian were only just beginning. The higher we climbed, the smaller his empire seemed to get, until it was just a dot on the dark map below. I looked at Leto. He was sleeping against my arm, completely unaware of the empire his father had just lost. I felt a surge of protectiveness that was stronger than anything I had ever felt before. We were safe, and we were free, heading into a future where no one could tell us how to speak or act. The plane banked left, heading towards the coast. I felt a small, bitter smile touch my lips. Julian is likely screaming at his phone right now, trying to figure out a way to stop the inevitable collapse of his career. But it was too late. He traded his family for a moment of arrogance, and the bill was coming due. I closed my eyes, picturing his face when he read that email, and for the first time in years, I felt a genuine sense of peace. We're thousands of miles away now, but the real chaos is only just starting back at the estate. Julian has no idea that his entire legal team has already resigned. Do you think I was right to expose his crimes, or did I risk too much by dragging his career into this? If you want to see what happens when the police arrive at his front door and how I handled the custody battle from halfway across the world, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. I read every single one of them. The landing gear hit the runway in a different time zone, miles away from the life I used to know. My phone began to vibrate, first once, then a dozen times, then continuously. It was Julian, his name flashing across the screen with relentless, angry energy. I didn't answer. I handed the phone to a prepaid service assistant who had been waiting for us, a woman I had hired specifically to intercept his initial panic. "Everything is pre-programmed, ma'am," the assistant said, a calm professional. I nodded, watching the sunrise over a new horizon. The estate, the dinners, the forced apologies, they all felt like scenes of a movie I'd walked out of. I had left behind the heavy silk drapes and the cold stone walls, and in their place, I had the freedom of the open road. Back at the estate, the board members were already calling an emergency meeting. Julian's private office had been locked by the authorities, and Selena, terrified of being implicated, was already scrambling to delete her digital trail. But I had already archived every conversation she'd ever had with his department heads. She had been foolish enough to use her personal email for corporate communication, never realizing I had mirrored her account months ago. "They're calling it a hostile corporate takeover," my contact messaged me. I watched the news tickers pop up on a tablet. Julian's face was on the screen, looking older and frailer than I'd ever seen him. He looked like a man who realized he'd built his house on sand, watching as the wind finally tore the roof off. Leo woke up, rubbing his eyes. "Mummy, are we going to see Daddy soon?" My heart ached for him, but I kept my voice firm. "We're going on an adventure, Leo. A long one." I didn't want to explain the betrayal to him, not yet. I wanted him to remember me as the person who took him to the ocean, not the person who ran away from a burning wreck. A knock at the door of our temporary apartment made me jump. I peered through the peephole. It wasn't the police. It was a private investigator hired by Julian's mother. She was still trying to find us, even now when her son's company was burning to the ground. Her obsession with control was a generational curse, and she wasn't going to let me slip through her fingers without a fight. I didn't open the door. I walked to the back exit, clutching Leo's hand. We had practiced this. We were gone before the investigator could even finish his second knock. We were ghosts now, moving through a world where Julian couldn't touch us because he never learned to navigate anything outside of his own privilege. I looked at my watch. It had been 24 hours since I left. The news of Julian's embezzlement had broken internationally, and the bank had frozen the accounts he thought were untouchable. Selena had been spotted leaving the estate in a taxi, her luggage looking significantly lighter than it had been when she arrived, a perfect visual metaphor for the hollow life she had been chasing. I checked the bank balance on my phone. The funds were secure. The legal team I had hired was waiting for his next move, ready to counter every desperate, panicked attempt he made to claw back his power. I had anticipated his legal maneuvers, his bribes, and his threats, and I had built a wall of evidence that even his lawyers couldn't breach. Julian thought money was power, but he never understood that information was the only currency that really mattered. I had the ledger, the emails, and the witness statements. I had the full story, and for the first time, I was the one holding the pen that would write the end. I realized then that my fear had been a lie. The truth was the only thing I ever needed to hold. I spent the afternoon walking through the local marketplace, feeling the warmth of the sun and the indifference of the crowd. No one knew who I was, no one expected an apology, and no one cared how I spent my time. It was the most exhilarating feeling I had ever experienced, the sheer weight of anonymity. As the sun began to dip, I found myself sitting on a pier, watching the boats go out to sea. I thought about the life I left, the coldness of the estate, and the way Julian would look at me as if I were a servant who had failed a task. Those days were gone, replaced by the salt-heavy air and the promise of a night with no arguments, no demands, and no apologies. Julian's family is desperate to find us, but they have no idea what else I have in my pocket. There's a secret file regarding the family's original business dealings that will shut them down for good. Do you think I should release it, or is the damage to Julian's career enough? If you want to see how I finally confronted her mother and protected Leo from their reach, subscribe and leave a comment. I settled into a small, quiet coastal town, thousands of miles away from the reach of the estate. Every morning felt like a victory, but Julian's mother was relentless. She had tracked us to the region, and I saw her car parked outside the local library where Leo and I went to read. She had that same pinched look of arrogance that Julian had, a look that told me she still thought she could win. I didn't run. I walked right up to her car. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "You have no idea what you've destroyed," she hissed. "My son is ruined. Our legacy is a joke." I looked at her, unbothered. "Your legacy wasn't built on business, it was built on fear." She tried to hand me a document. "Sign this. It gives Julian full custody, and in exchange, we will stop the investigation." I took the document and ripped it in half right in front of her. There is no deal. There is only the truth. I watched the pieces of paper flutter to the ground, a confetti of defeat that she was forced to stare at. She stared at me, trembling. "You don't understand the power we still have." I leaned into the window. "You have a court order that doesn't mean anything in this jurisdiction, and you have a son who's likely spending his evening talking to federal investigators about your role in the offshore accounts." She drove away, tires spinning on the gravel. I felt a massive weight lift. That was the last time they would ever try to intimidate me. The legal wall I had built was impenetrable, filled with enough evidence to keep them busy for the rest of their miserable lives. A few hours later, a video call request flashed on my laptop. It was Julian. He looked broken, his suit rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. "I need you to come back," he begged. "I'll do anything. Selena is gone. The business is gone. Just come back." I had never seen him look so small, so diminished, and for a moment I wondered if he even remembered how to be a person without his status. I didn't say a word. I let him talk for a minute, listening to the unraveling of his life. He was realizing that I was the only person who had truly seen him, and now I was the only person he wanted to return to, not because he loved me, but because he missed the illusion of the life we had. "You're not missing me, Julian," I said finally. "You're missing the person who kept your secrets, and that person is gone." I ended the call, the silence of the room rushing back in to fill the gap where his frantic voice had been. The house felt very quiet. Leo was playing with his blocks in the corner, laughing at something only he could see. I realized then that I had already won. The battle wasn't for the money or the estate. It was for my peace of mind, and I had finally reclaimed it. I opened the final file, the one regarding his family's illegal real estate schemes. I had been holding on to it, waiting for the right moment. The moment had arrived, and I found myself staring at the cursor on the screen, ready to press send and finally be done with the entire family. I thought about the years I spent making dinner for people who hated me, the hours I sat in meetings I didn't care about, and the life I had built based on someone else's definition of success. I was finally writing my own definition, and it started with letting go of the anger. I began to go through my old journals, the ones I had hidden in the back of my closet, and I realized how much I had stifled myself. I was a talented researcher, a brilliant auditor, and a mother who had the strength to take on an empire. I had been dimming my own light to make his seem brighter. I realized that if I had stayed, I would have eventually become exactly like them, cold, manipulative, and obsessed with things that didn't matter. Walking away wasn't just a flight, it was a rescue mission for the person I used to be. The evidence I hold is the final nail in the coffin for their dynasty. Do you think I should turn it over, or should I hold on to it as leverage forever? Let me know in the comments. I'm deciding what to do before the final part. Subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion of this story. The investigator arrived at dawn. I pointed to the table where the evidence sat. He scanned the files, eyes widening. "This is everything," he whispered. "This changes everything." I watched him leave, feeling a book close I never wanted to read again. The estate was gone. The person I used to be had vanished with it. I felt a strange, light buoyancy. By afternoon, the news broke. The estate was raided. Julian and his inner circle were facing charges. I muted the TV before Leo could hear the headlines. We didn't need that noise. We needed peace. I checked my account. It was enough for a fresh start. I was launching my own business in this coastal town, something mine, free from their shadow. Julian's name flashed on my phone one last time. I let it ring into voicemail. I didn't need his apologies. They were hollow words from a man who traded his soul for greed. A year later, a letter arrived from the prison. I didn't open it. I dropped it into the fireplace, watching the flames consume the envelope. Then, the door swung open. Leo rushed in from the beach, his pockets full of seashells, his face beaming. "Mommy, look!" He dumped his treasures on the island. I smiled. A real, genuine smile. This was my life now. Small wonders and the honest love of my son. I sat on the porch, watching the waves. The past was sharp, but it was receding. I had saved us both. That was enough. We made it. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that save us. What was the most shocking moment for you? Hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below. I'll be back soon.